You are listening to the No Formula Podcast, episode number 30. Beth Armconnect Miller is the founder of Executive Velocity. She's helped hundreds of people develop leadership skills. And in this episode, Beth tells us about her journey before building her company. She also reveals 5 leadership growth tips. Visit www.executive-velocity.com to work with Beth. In the meantime, keep listening to learn how to measure leadership growth, how to self-audit your leadership skills, and how Beth helped a client climb the corporate ladder and now reports directly to the CEO.
The No Formula Podcast offers a glimpse into the lives of real entrepreneurs who possess a variety of experiences and backgrounds. Through raw conversations, learn about their passions, journeys, setbacks, and milestones. Join host Laura L. Bernhard as she confirms that there is in fact no formula to success. Get inspired and stay motivated throughout your entire journey. Subscribe today.
Hi, Beth. Thanks so much for being here with us today.
Well, I've been looking forward to our conversation, Laura.
Yes, I'm super excited because I know you have a lot to share with us that
me?
I think is very valuable for our audience today. So I just want to jump right into it. And I want to start with how you got into business in the first place.
Well, it actually started by way of my husband. He started an accounting temporary services firm back in the late 80s. And he convinced me to join him several years later. I was working for Coopers & Lybrand in their technology practice, specifically selling their projects. And he convinced me to leave and start a division of consulting for him. And so that's how I got into entrepreneurship.
That's so awesome. I love that you guys became like partners in life and then also in business.
Yep, exactly.
Okay, so what was this company all about?
So the company what happened was it went through growth with 2 divisions. One was an accounting temporary services firm and another one was a technology consulting firm. And we sold the accounting firm in, mid-90s. And because we realized we were making more money on the consulting side. And we then reinvested that money into the consulting practice, which we grew to about 10 million in revenue, a little over 100 employees. And then we went through the dot-bomb and the Y2K era, where there were a lot of people, technology people that were out there, but they only wanted to join companies that had stock options, and we weren't going to go public. So it was really hard to attract talent.
Mm-hmm.
And so as we moved through the Y2K, we just got really tired of trying to push the rock uphill. So we decided we had the opportunity to sell, and we sold at that point in time, and took some time off and did some traveling. We don't have children, so it was a good time to start exploring the world. But I got bored and didn't want to stay retired. I had been working for myself for so long. Going back and working for a company was just not in the cards for me. I just couldn't imagine doing that. So I had some challenges as to, okay, do I start another company? And what happened was I found Vistage. And when we talked earlier, I shared with you that Vistage is this CEO membership organization where we bring like-minded business owners together on a monthly basis and in like a mastermind group or advisory board group. And there's all different kinds of industries in the group. There's no competitors. And I would facilitate monthly meetings. I started this back in 2006. Mm-hmm. And had 3 or 4 groups for quite some time. And then I'd started Executive Velocity, which does coaching and leadership training work. And by the end of beginning of last year, 2019, I decided that it was time to step down from the Vistage work and focus my time just on Executive Velocity.
So how did you make the shift from Vistage to Executive Velocity? Like, what made you say, oh yeah, this is the right time, or this is why I want to start my own business again?
Well, actually, Executive Velocity, I started about the same time that I became a Vistage chair.
Oh,
But
okay.
it wasn't taking up as much of my time. Yeah, it was a parallel thing because Vistage was, group meetings and one-to-one coaching, and then the Executive Velocity was other coaching work. It was assessments, doing hiring and leadership development assessments, using assessments like Business DNA and Myers-Briggs and Hogan and 360s. And then it also, I provided training for new managers and executive coaching and group coaching.
Oh wow, so you've helped a lot of people with leadership.
Yeah, I think recently I started trying to look back on how many leaders I've helped over the
Mhm.
years, and it's in the hundreds.
Oh wow. So out of
Yeah.
curiosity, after helping so many people, obviously, what do you think is the most common mistake leaders make?
The most common mistake I have seen is that, especially new leaders, they try to solve problems for others versus coaching the individual to solve their own problem. So what
Hmm.
they do is they tend to enable people, their team members and employees, to keep coming to them with problems, and they immediately start solving the problems.
Okay, so instead of encouraging, let's say, the employee to come up with a solution, they try to do it themselves.
Right. And so one of the things that I'll work with leaders, especially new leaders, on is getting them to slow down and ask questions of that person that's bringing them a problem, to
Mhm.
get that person to self-reflect and explore options versus throwing out the idea. I say, listen, teach them to fish. Don't keep throwing them the fish.
Yeah. Okay, okay. And that's actually, we'll get into more detail later, but that's actually one of your leadership growth tips is actually asking the right questions.
Yes. Yep. Make sure that they've explored within their minds options
Hmm.
before helping them. It might be, now if it's a new employee that hasn't had any experience, then that's the time to mentor them
Hmm.
and give them that advice. But don't feel like you have to solve every problem.
Hmm. Just before we continue with that, do you believe anybody can be a leader?
I think that people who desire to be a leader
Hmm.
and understand that leadership is not about them, but about those they lead, then yes, then they can be a leader. But too often people get confused with leadership and a title. Leaders are about creating an environment where others will grow and that they will grow as well.
So it's very much the people who have the right intentions can
Right,
become leaders.
exactly.
Okay, that makes sense. What do you think are the key metrics people can use to measure whether or not they were growing as a leader? Is that even possible?
So I look at leadership in two dimensions.
Okay.
One is results,
Mm-hmm.
and the other is relationships. So depending on the environment and culture of an organization, one of those will be stronger than the other.
Yeah.
Some companies, results, it's all about results. And there are other companies where relationships and the culture come first, and their belief is that if they get those the people and the culture right, then the results will come.
Mm-hmm.
So from a metrics perspective, I believe that one of the key metrics, and this actually comes also from a dear friend of mine, David Marquet, who wrote a book called Turn the Ship Around. And it's his story about leading a nuclear submarine that was last in its class, and how he changed the leadership in the organization on the submarine to become the highest performing submarine in 3 years. But it wasn't the results that he's most proud of. It's the fact that the people that were in that submarine that he led went on to greater responsibilities. So that, to me, that's a key metric of a leader, is how they have developed and grown other people. I think the other metric would have to be kind of that results, and results for one organization would be different than results for another. For a public company, it's return on investment, stock market price or whatever. Mm-hmm. I work primarily for privately held companies, and so those metrics would probably be things like increase in the value of the organization. If it's a company that's owned by its employees, it might be what kind of value are you creating for your employees?
Mm-hmm.
So those will be some of the metrics.
So it depends.
Right. It depends. Exactly.
Like, I think results and relationships can be kind of like the common denominator amongst most of your examples. But then going one step further and probably looking at like more shorter term goals or metrics, I guess it does depend.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm going to put you on the spot here, okay, Beth? Why should people pay attention to leadership? As a CEO or as an entrepreneur, why should people look within themselves and say, oh, I have to improve my leadership?
I think that the stronger you are as a leader, the better the results you're going to get. Mm-hmm. Great leaders engage their employees, they inspire them, they help them connect to the greater vision of the organization, and those things pay off in the long run. Mm-hmm. They pay off in growth of the organization, value of the organization, those kinds of things.
And before we were mentioning CEOs and entrepreneurs, and do you think every CEO has to be a leader?
They should.
Can you give us examples?
And I would say that, most large companies where people have, kind of come up in the organization, mm-hmm. and proven themselves, clearly have a lot of those leadership capabilities. Mm-hmm. As I said earlier, a title like CEO doesn't necessarily mean that that person's a leader.
Yeah.
They have to display the qualities of a leader. Just because you're a CEO doesn't make you a leader.
Mm-hmm.
They should be, though.
So just before we get into some of your leadership growth tips, can you give us an example of a leader, maybe not by name, but just a story that you might have on how you've helped this leader grow?
Oh gosh, I'll tell you my favorite story.
Okay.
So this woman I've known for 4 or 5 years now. I was called in to work with her. She had been in the organization for quite some time and had risen to a certain level, but she was having some issues around emotional intelligence.
Mm-hmm.
And particularly her ability to self-manage her emotions and building, relationships across departments. And normally when I hear that, I'm like, wow, this is going to be a tough one. But I ran some assessments on her, and she was highly goal-oriented and very competitive. And I thought, if she realizes that this is a major blind spot and could hold her back,
Mm-hmm.
she's going to be willing to do the heavy lifting. And she was. And I still work with her. She has risen 2 levels since that time. She now reports to the CEO.
Oh,
So,
nice.
yeah, she's a superstar.
So she was able to admit.
And through this time, yes. Oh yeah, yeah. And she's my biggest supporter in that organization. She's called me in to coach a number of her team members.
Oh, nice. That's
Yeah.
awesome.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm pretty excited because I'm very curious about these growth tips that we are going to get into. So before we kind of mentioned one of them, and that is your first growth tip, which is to ask good questions. So specifically, can you give us examples of a good question versus a bad question?
Yeah. So first of all, I qualify a good question as one that will cause one to self-reflect. So this gets back to my coaching work,
Mm-hmm.
and it's not a recall question. So a recall question is one in which somebody can answer pretty quickly, like, when did you go to the store? Or who was your teacher, right? Those are all recall questions. The self-reflection questions are generally start with how or what.
Mm-hmm.
So how did you come up with that conclusion? Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And then what caused you to go in that direction?
So very open-ended questions.
Yes, they're always open-ended questions. And then when you start getting more information, then you can kind of narrow it down. So, instead of saying what caused you to go in that direction, I could have said, what were the 2 things that caused you to go in that direction? So it helps somebody to focus. Because some people, when you ask that open-ended question, you might see deer in the headlights. So you want to narrow it down and get them to go, okay, now I only have to think of 2 things.
Yeah.
And then I'll also oftentimes, especially if you're having like a performance feedback conversation where it might be something difficult, I oftentimes will start by saying, you know, can I share an observation with you? Because what that does is it invites you're asking permission to give feedback. And it gets the person on the other side curious as to, gosh, what do they have to share with me? I've never had anybody say no.
Yeah, because it's a gentle way to give
Right.
them, which could be
Yeah.
kind of constructive feedback, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Yes. I actually learned it from another friend who was a coach, and we were having lunch one day, and he used it on me. I was like, wow, that is really good. Those are the good questions. A bad question, one kind of bad question is one in which you make somebody feel defensive. Like, why did you do that? Versus, what were the things that caused you to do that? See the difference?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, those whys can make people defensive.
Okay, so stay away from whys.
Yes.
Okay. Okay, I think that's a pretty good rule of thumb.
Yeah.
You know? Okay. So your second tip is active listening. And I feel like this kind of goes with your first tip of asking good questions. And I feel like a lot of people don't understand what active listening is. And so if you can give us a definition of active listening and why it's so important.
Yeah, so active listening is being able to clear your mind of all judgment and preconceived notions when you're having a conversation. It's also kind of trying to eliminate maybe things that might be on your mind, and making sure that you understand what is being said. So there are some techniques that can help improve active listening. One of them is, I always recommend, is if you're having a really important conversation and you've got other things on your mind, write them down first. So you've put them down and you've gotten them out of your mind. Okay. The second is to basically, when you're listening to somebody, to echo back to them what you heard. So not like a parrot, but to say, okay, so what I just heard you say, Laura, is blippity blippity blip, okay? Then it gives you the opportunity to say, Beth, no, that's not exactly what I said. So you're getting a lot clearer communication between the two of you. The other thing that is important with active listening is getting comfortable with silence. So you could ask, getting back to those open-ended questions, you could ask a question where the person goes silent because they're trying to come up with an answer, because it's not a recall question. They have to really think about it. It's so easy as a leader to try and rescue a person when the silence goes, right?
Mm-hmm.
You have this silence and you want to help them. Well, the technique that I share with people is that if you start feeling uncomfortable, don't rescue them. But what you can do is just quietly say to them, just take your time. That, again, gives them permission to continue to think and isn't rescuing them and providing them with your solution.
So, if I understand correctly, Beth,
I love
you're
it.
saying
This
you're
is
saying
good.
that tips for active listening is to write down your thoughts before listening to the, let's say, employee's thoughts. Also to echo back to make sure you're understanding and
Yeah,
being okay with silence.
that's correct. You got it.
Oh my gosh, I think I just learned what active listening is. That's awesome. Okay. So, the third tip that you provided for leadership growth tips is asking for feedback from employees. And
Yes.
by working in many different environments, I know that this can be extremely difficult. So I wanted to know if you have specific tips that leaders can use to encourage people to provide feedback and just be comfortable with speaking up.
Yeah. So one of the things is to do it in group settings, in
Oh,
teammate stuff, where you as a leader ask at appropriate times, obviously, what you can be doing to help them. And that's the trap that leaders kind of fall into when they ask for what kind of help the employee needs. They're always concerned that the person's going to want some sort of resource like a new desk or a new computer or a raise or something like that, right? So they have to be really careful about how they ask for the feedback. So it's, what can I do personally? What can I do differently to support you? It's gotta be so, because you don't want to wind up with people asking for all sorts of resources and you don't have a budget to do that.
yeah.
But what you do have control over is your time, your behaviors, how you support individuals.
So it's very much making sure you're asking for feedback about yourself because that's
Mhm.
what you have control over.
Right, exactly. And here's the key is that when you get the feedback, you thank them, you don't get defensive, and then you do something with that feedback. If if you keep asking for feedback and you're not doing anything with it, they're gonna shut down. They're gonna stop giving you feedback because you're not doing anything with it.
Yeah, because they're going to notice.
Yes.
Yeah. Sorry, I was just taking it all in there. I feel like I'm in a class and I'm just learning.
Well, good.
Yeah. Okay. So if we move on to the fourth tip, you said it was to practice gratitude by praise and recognition.
Mm-hmm.
Now, to me, how is this allowing a leader to grow?
Ooh. Well, I'll tell you, praise and recognition is is something that doesn't, for a lot of leaders, doesn't come naturally.
Mm-hmm.
It's a lot easier to provide feedback of what you could be doing differently than praise and recognition. And there was research done, I don't know how long ago. I just remember the actual numbers, but your brain likes rewards obviously more than punishment.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yes.
yes, so if you are not providing 5 times more praise than feedback, the individual is only going to remember the feedback and not the praise.
That's a lot.
It is a lot. It's a whole lot. And so when I work with leaders, I tell them, listen, your goal is for 3 to 1, not 5 to 1, because 5 to 1 is just such a stretch.
Yeah.
And the other thing is, leaders generally think that praise and recognition should come when somebody does something extraordinary. Well, that's not the point of praise and recognition. What you should be doing is you want to reinforce those things that they're doing well at, not extraordinary, but well at, because you want to see more of that behavior. So it's not about that super big project that they finished, but it's how they interact with a customer over the phone, and how they are able to resolve the customer's problem quickly. You want them to be doing more of that. A lot of leaders think, well, that's what I'm paying them to do. Why should I have to tell them and praise them for that? Because you want them to do more of it. It's kind of like parenting. If you think about little kids,
Mm-hmm.
you're going to praise them for taking those first steps, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's what a kid does.
Yeah.
Right? They walk. But that doesn't mean you don't praise them, because
Yeah.
you want them to do more of it.
And
Yeah.
I feel like this is even more difficult now that people are working remotely. Do you have
Yeah.
tips on how leaders can, praise and recognize their employees even when they're not in the same building anymore?
That obviously our virtual environment today makes a lot of things more difficult.
Mm-hmm.
So that's when leaders really need to be more involved with, like, the Zoom meetings and conference calls and things like that, and being able to listen to what people are saying, because you can't really see what they're doing.
Yeah.
But it's what are they saying and what are they accomplishing, and engaging them in the in what they're doing. So example would be if a salesperson had just landed a new client.
Mm-hmm.
Then on the Zoom call, you highlight that salesperson. We all know that he or she got the deal, but then get curious and say, gee, tell us how you did that, because it was such a big deal.
Mm-hmm.
I want other people to know how you did that. So that's recognizing and then allowing them to share how, their success.
So this is done in front of other employees.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, that's very interesting. Yeah, I feel like it's way more difficult now just to keep up with communication. But
Yeah.
going back to, any corporate environment, whether it's remote or not, I want to address the last leadership growth tip. And that is to focus on what you can control and influence. So to me, like this does not include like revenue, right? Which is super important for a lot of businesses. So can you go into more detail about what you mean by control and influence?
Okay. So it is, well, there's two levels. There's control first, and then there's influence.
Mhm.
So the things that let's take, for instance, the situation that we're in today globally, right? What can we control? We can control our thoughts, our behaviors, right?
Mhm.
Our actions, all of those things we can control. What can we influence? We can influence others' behaviors and actions, depending on the relationship, right?
Yeah.
The point of this last tip is that if you spend your time in the worry world of worrying about stuff that you can't control or influence, it's a waste of time.
So like
And
worrying about revenue.
right, if you have if you're not in sales and you can't control or influence revenue, then don't worry about it, because you can't control or influence it. It's like me worrying about whether or not I can go on my next vacation.
Mm-hmm.
Well, you know what? I have no control or influence over that right now. I'd love to hop on a plane and go to Europe. It's not happening. So I'm not sitting around worrying and commiserating that I can't do that.
Yeah.
I'm focused on what I can control.
And I think that's good advice for anybody, no matter
Yeah.
what position you're in.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, Beth, before we finish this interview, I have a couple questions. I want to ask you. So, the name of this podcast is the No Formula Podcast because there is no single formula to success. Okay. Do you think there is a formula to becoming a leader?
That's a really good question. That's an excellent question.
Thank you.
Even though it's a closed-ended question, it's still a really good question.
Wow. Beth, just a little jab in there, but it's really good.
Yeah, I don't think there's any set formula. There's so many books out there of great leaders, and they all had different personalities and different strengths. I think the one thing that great leaders do well at is they know how to put great teams together. They know what their strengths and their weaknesses are, and they surround themselves with people that fill the gaps of their weaknesses.
Yeah. And that's absolutely necessary to
Yeah.
build and grow. Yeah.
Exactly.
And finally, I want to ask you if there's one thing that you want the audience to take away from this interview, what would it be?
that if you want to be a great leader, I would, and you're not yet, okay, I would focus on building your emotional intelligence and giving yourself the opportunity to get into leadership positions in the community and volunteer work. I mean, that's where I got a lot of my early leadership opportunities was in nonprofits, on nonprofit boards. And it's a great learning opportunity that, you know, there's no risk there. You can make a lot of mistakes when you're, you know, working for a nonprofit on a board, where, because you're not getting paid, where you know, you can learn there and then take it back to your work.
That's awesome.
So two things: emotional intelligence, and then community work with nonprofits.
Yeah, I love it. And you actually mentioned something that I can probably ask you 10 questions about, and I'll tell you what it is. You said, if you are a leader, and then you said, actually, if you're not a good leader yet. Mm-hmm. And I would love to know your opinion on, I'm sure that you've met people who thought they were a good leader.
Yeah. and weren't yet. Yeah. So part of it, I mean, some of it is just understanding what leadership is. And there's, you know, a lot of people believe it's about managing, and it's not. Managing is really about process and making sure that processes and operations run smoothly through people, but you have to lead those people in a way that they will then do the process properly and do the projects properly. So leaders can improve, definitely. It's just, it gets back to my example of the woman who rose up to directly to reporting to the CEO. Mm-hmm. She was very goal oriented, and she was willing to do the heavy lifting, and she's become a phenomenal leader. She was an okay leader before.
But she also admitted that she needed help. Yes,
you're right. She was self-aware enough, which is part of emotional intelligence, is having that self-awareness. And yeah, she clearly knew that how she was operating was going to hold her back from future promotions, and that she wasn't okay with that.
Yeah,
some people will say, well, that's fine. I don't want to change. Mm-hmm. I'm okay with who I am, and I will just be in this position for as long as they will have me.
Is there a question or two that people can ask to themselves to kind of self-audit their leadership so that they're at least aware that maybe they should seek coaching or at least be aware that they can improve?
Oh, wow. Wow, that's a really good question. Well, one question they could ask themselves is, how do my employees feel about my leadership?
Okay, that's a good one.
And then the follow-on question is, how do I know that? So if I answer that, oh, they think, you know, that I hung the moon or whatever, then, well, where's the data for that, right? How can I prove that is a correct assumption? Mm-hmm. Now Now, the way that I do it when I'm going into to coach is we'll run 360 assessments. And so the leader will get feedback from his or her manager, his or her peers, direct reports, collaborators. And even if it's a larger organization, skip reports. So her manager's manager.
Mm-hmm.
And that will give a lot of information to the individual as to how good a leader they really are.
Yeah, and that'll solidify if the answer to the first question is correct, is what do my employees think of my leadership?
Right.
Right. Yeah.
Exactly.
Okay. That's awesome. Well, Beth, thank you so much for this. I've learned so much. I took so many notes. But thank you so much. And we'll definitely keep in touch.
Yes, I've really enjoyed it. It's been a great conversation.
Thank you.
Before ending this episode, I want to summarize Beth's leadership growth tips. I personally think they are helpful for anyone working in a professional environment, so let's just jump right into them. 1. Ask good questions that elicit self-reflection. These questions usually start with how or what. 2. Active listening is when you clear your mind of all judgment. Practice active listening by writing your thoughts down, echoing back what you heard, and getting comfortable with silence. 3. Ask for feedback. Then thank them for the feedback and take action. 4. Practice gratitude by praise and recognition. The ratio is 3 times more praise than feedback. And 5. Focus on what you can control and influence. Examples include thoughts, behaviors, and actions. Thanks for listening, everyone.